Hi everyone, this video is to introduce the third major project in WRIT 1120, which is the researched project. In this video, I'm going to talk through the strategies for the project, approaches you can take to completing the project, as well as some requirements and things to be keeping in mind as you're writing. As you work on the researched project, it's important to keep in mind that this is the culmination of your research proposal as well as the incident analysis that you completed at the beginning of the semester. The researched project's goal is to present an argumentative thesis about the topic or problem that you initially proposed and started to research. Keep in mind that in this project, you should conduct the research study that you proposed in that research proposal and/or compile the research that you gathered in the annotated bibliography in that project. You should compose an academic argument that responds to your research question. So remember, your goal was to answer a particular question about a problem or topic that you proposed in that research proposal. You should also have a goal of seeking new understanding about your topic. So remember that you shouldn't have entered this project with a preconceived notion in mind. Your research was, by design, to find an answer to a question, not to seek support for an answer you already have. You also should think about this project as a way to contribute to the scholarly conversation. So not only are you using source material to support an argument, you also are joining the conversation that those sources are contributing to. Some basic requirements for the project are that it needs to be at least 8 pages long and include at least 8 sources. So remember that you should be using all of the same sources that you've included in your annotated bibliography, and those can be a combination of scholarly secondary sources as well as any primary sources that you've chosen to use. So those could be interviews, surveys, observations, in addition to scholarly journal articles, books, ebooks, etc. This project should also be in APA format. So if you have any additional questions about APA format, feel free to contact me, but also make use of the resources that are available in our Canvas site and on sites like Purdue OWL. When we're doing APA, remember that you need to include a few elements in this formatting system. You need to include a title page at the beginning of your project. You need to include a page that has your abstract on it, and we'll work in our Canvas site in our discussions on creating an abstract. You need to include in-text citations throughout your project, giving proper attribution to your source material, and also provide the attribution on a references page. Remember that you've already done your annotated bibliography, so you should be able to pull those long-form citations right from the bibliography and put it into your references page. Like all APA formatting, your references page should be alphabetized by the first item in your citation, and typically that is an author's last name. If you've got any questions about APA, want some additional feedback, etc., just let me know. The big thing that I want to drive home about this project is that you should be thinking about it as a chance to join the ongoing conversation about your topic. So you've had a chance to read through a lot of different source material, to perhaps go out and conduct your own primary research. And you've been hearing a lot of different voices respond to this question or problem. This is the space for you to add your voice to that conversation. Your voice should be front and center. Definitely you should be using source material and research to support your perspective, but your voice should be shining through. So think of it as the thing that you're leading with. Your backup singers are your source material, your research, and all those things that you can use to support you and also give context and make your discussion or performance even more rich. Use those sources to shape your ideas. So keep in mind that, like we've talked about throughout the semester, you shouldn't be entering research with a preconceived notion. You should be using that habit of mind of openness and be flexible. So enter this project with an open mind and use those source materials as well as any research you've conducted to shape your argument. Keep in mind that if you initially had a bias or a perspective that you entered into this project with, But if your source material and your research is countering that or challenging your preconceived notions, that's a sign that you need to be open and flexible and potentially change your perspective. Don't form an argument that doesn't have any basis in fact or any support from your research and source material. That can be a challenge, especially if you've entered this project as something that's really personal to you that you had a bias or perspective about. Remember that that's part of the research process. Sometimes we're challenged, sometimes we're surprised by what it is we find, but it's most important to enter into that research and this project and any projects that you do that are research-based with integrity and the willingness to change and to adapt. There are some different approaches you can take to completing this project. I'm going to go through and describe each one. Keep in mind that you might choose just one approach, or you might sort of combine and adapt these approaches to your own needs. If you have any questions at any time or aren't sure what approach you really want to take, want to talk through your project a little bit more, feel free to email me and we can find a time to talk. The first approach you can take to completing this project is causes. And the causes approach is really asking you to think about the exigence or the motivation for the problem or the issue that you're talking about. So it's essentially to speculate on why something might be happening. And you're going to use your research, your findings to justify and explain that phenomenon. So for example, if I was writing a project or doing research on nursing and breastfeeding, I might have a thesis like this. Based on observations of local businesses, interviews with nursing parents, and scholarly research on breastfeeding laws, fewer parents are nursing in public due to fear of ostracization and confrontation with strangers. A couple things in that thesis statement. First of all, I'm demonstrating in my thesis what I'm basing my argument on. I right away say, based on observations of businesses, interviews, and scholarly research of this stuff. There's my justification. There's my basis and my support, and I'm describing it right there in my thesis. I'm making an argument. Fewer parents are nursing in public. That's based in fact. I'm demonstrating that that's something that is happening. And my argument then, that is potentially controversial, is that its causes are fear of ostracization and confrontation with strangers. So for me, my argument that I'm making is this is the reason that this phenomenon is happening. So see that in my thesis statement, I've provided a couple different components that demonstrate that I'm talking about causes of a problem. In approach 2, I would be talking about results. So the results are an outcome. I might be postulating about what results will happen or are happening because of a phenomenon or a problem. So essentially, this is me talking about end game, what I think is going to happen. So in this example, an analysis of scholarly research on breastfeeding rates indicates that without intervention, the number of nursing parents in the United States will reach an all-time low by 2025. As a result, fewer newborns will receive antibodies typically provided in breast milk, rates of postpartum depression will increase, and costs of infant care will climb for new parents. So let me break that thesis statement down a little bit. I'm once again talking about what I'm basing this thesis statement on, my analysis of scholarly research, what that analysis is indicating to me. So it's showing that breastfeeding rates are declining and that without us doing something about it, the number of nursing parents is going to reach an all-time low. And I've given my argument about when that will be according to my analysis. Then I'm doing that second part of my thesis where I'm talking about the results. So I'm going to argue that as a result, here's what's going to happen. Fewer babies are going to get antibodies from breast milk. The rates of postpartum depression are going to increase because parents aren't nursing. And the cost of infant care are going to climb because parents are going to be using formula, etc. So I'm giving 3 results that I'm going to then articulate, analyze, and describe in my project. So in this approach, I'm not just demonstrating fact, I'm also hypothesizing about what is going to happen. I'm making an argument about potential results. In approach 3, we're talking about answers. So think of this as the answer or solution. And this is maybe an approach that you're more familiar with because it's providing a response of some kind to a problem. So you're responding to the results and proposing potential solutions to a problem or an issue that's ongoing. And this approach, I think, can sometimes seem more simple, but ends up being more complex. Because remember that you've got to be thinking about a lot of different components. You have to think about something that's realistic, something that can actually be implemented. And for a lot of problems, your instincts might be to go big. You might want a really huge solution that's overarchingly going to fix a problem. It's the world peace solution. You want something that's going to take care of all the problems. But realistically, you might be talking about just one component of the problem. You might need to provide a solution that's simple, that works for a particular group, or that works in a particular setting. So although our instincts are often to think big, and big ideas are great, for the purposes of our project, I want you to be thinking realistic and also be thinking small. Thinking small is going to be a strategy for you to be able to implement a realistic answer and solution that, if you got it into the right hands and the right audience, could actually be implemented. So here's an example. To increase the comfort level of nursing parents feeding their children in public spaces, more businesses and organizations must definitively endorse nursing through posted policies, provide lactation spaces when possible, and join campaigns to encourage parents to continue nursing. And I'd argue this thesis statement is still pretty broad and kind of a big idea. I could narrow it and get even more specific by talking about a specific location, a specific organization, maybe a town or a city. So I could target this thesis statement to Bowling Green, for example, or even BGSU. I could target it to specific organizations, government buildings in Ohio, something like that. But see the couple things that I'm doing in this thesis statement to maneuver and demonstrate that I'm providing a solution. I'm talking about what I ultimately want to happen. I want to increase the comfort level of nursing parents. That's my ultimate goal, and I've talked about it there in my thesis. Then I've talked about who I want to be implementing this solution, and this is a really important component that gets skipped a lot. Think about who your audience is. Who can actually make this change? You need to be addressing them directly and clearly throughout your project. So I'm talking to businesses and organizations. I could be even more specific there, really. Here's what I want them to do. I want them to endorse nursing through posted policies. So provide lactation spaces. I want them to have, and then join campaigns to encourage public nursing. So I've given 3 specific solutions that I'm then going to talk about throughout my paper. I've targeted to specific audiences and given my goal or ultimate outcome that I want to achieve. The 4th approach that I want to talk about is one that is maybe not as familiar to you, and that's the problematize approach. So problematizing a problem can be really interesting and fruitful, but can also be kind of complicated. So the goal here is to problematize and deconstruct an issue into all of its working parts. And if you are a person that identifies with metacognition as a habit of mind, if you're a thinker and you love thinking about thinking, this might be the approach for you. Here's my example, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Breastfeeding rates are continuing to fall across the United States, especially in areas where parents receive little support to breastfeed, where parental leave is short, unpaid, or non-existent, and where there have been historically low rates for at least 2 generations. Efforts to increase rates of breastfeeding or address obstacles to breastfeeding need to consider economic problems and solutions for parents. So if you notice, this is almost kind of a catch-all combination of a lot of the other approaches we've already talked about. Let's break it down. Breastfeeding rates across the United States are continuing to fall. That's my opening bit. I'm making a statement that's based in fact. I can demonstrate that with my source material, especially in areas where parents receive little to no support for breastfeeding, where parental leave is short, and there have been historically low rates already for generations. I'm talking about causes. And those causes could be ones that I am pulling from source material or things that I'm analyzing and making an argument myself. They still should be based on some kind of research. Then I'm talking about efforts to increase rates of breastfeeding and avoid or address obstacles. And they need to consider economic problems and solutions. So I might not have clearly defined solutions there. I might not have a specific plan on how to do that, but I'm talking through the fact that if people are going to take up this cause and do solutions, I think they need to be economically based. So this is what I might call pulling from a lot of different materials, a lot of different areas, and not going quite as deep into each approach. So I'm kind of talking about causes a little bit. I'm kind of talking about problems and solutions a little bit, but I'm not maybe going as far into each of those areas as I might if I was exclusively writing about solutions or exclusively writing about causes. Problematizing is kind of just pulling at all of these little threads, all these little things that you've seen in your research, all these little things that you've thought about, breaking them apart. It's almost like when you see in a sci-fi movie when they've got an object of some kind and they have it up on a screen and they can pull it apart. I'm thinking of Age of Ultron. I think they do that a couple of times. Iron Man and Hulk do it a few times. They pull things apart on the screen, right? And you see all the different components and then they can put them back together. That's really what the problematizing approach is like. You're taking an issue, a thing that is this big, complex whatever, and then you're pulling it apart and you're seeing all the different components. And then ultimately at the end of your project, you're putting it back together. So think about it like that. You're pulling things apart and seeing how they work. You're getting into the nitty-gritty components, all the little gears and things that shift around, and breaking it down. This works best with a problem that maybe hasn't been analyzed in full. It's something that's maybe fairly new that you don't think a lot of people are talking about or that people need to understand better. So think about it like that. You're pulling something apart, looking at all the different components and describing them and talking them through, and then putting it all back together for your readers. This can be a very complex and challenging approach, but it often yields the most interesting and rewarding project. Another thing to keep in mind as you're working on your research project is that you do need to clearly state your research question and your thesis early in your project. Typically, this happens in your introduction. So you need to address what it is you ultimately wanted to find out, and then what argument you're making based on the research you've done into that research question. You should refer to that purpose for writing throughout your project to help guide your readers and maintain your focus. Don't take for granted that your readers will know exactly what you mean or follow along with your argument. You should be repeating that thesis, reworking it, rephrasing it. If your source material and your different paragraphs are the bricks, the thesis statement is the mortar. It's the thing that's holding all of those bricks together. And so you need to make sure you're layering it throughout your paper, or the ultimate wall or building that you're constructing in this project is going to fall down. Make sure that you're repeating that thesis over and over and over again. Also, apply your sources to contextualize, support, and develop your position. You should be using quotations and paraphrases from that source material throughout your project with proper attribution. So that means you need to be using in-text citations as well as signal phrases like Jones and Smith argue, Patel demonstrates. This goes for your primary source material as well. So refer to your interviews, refer to your surveys, refer to your observations, and have that material threaded throughout the rest of your project to give context as well as support the ultimate argument that you're making. Blending your narrative and your analysis from your incident analysis, source material from the research proposal and bibliography, and your newfound knowledge and perspective about the topic is the best way to approach this researched project. Think of it like the culmination of all of this other work that you've done throughout the semester so far. And keep in mind, it's okay to pull stuff from those previous projects. You might pull sections of your incident analysis and your narrative to support the argument that you're making. You might need to pull stuff from your research proposal to talk through the question or the background of the problem that you're actually looking into. And of course, you're going to pull stuff from your bibliography, as well as this new knowledge and expertise and hopefully different perspective that you have about this topic. Something that I want to remind you of that is really important when you're doing your research project, but that can get lost as you're excited about your sources or the ultimate argument you want to make, is there has to be an audience for this project. Remember that you're not just talking into the void. You should have a clear audience in mind for this project. Who is it that you're trying to reach? Address the audience that you hope to inform, persuade, with attention to their potential doubts, any resistance they might give you, gaps in their knowledge, things they might not understand, and any questions that might come up for them as they're reading your paper regarding your thesis statement. So keep in mind that your audience is going to have their own perspective on this topic. They might resist your argument, especially if it challenges their preconceived notions about a problem or a topic. Remember that you entered this research with a specific bias, perspective, and maybe even argument in mind, and you had to be open to being challenged and potentially changed by the research you did. You're going to have to provide that same opportunity, that same rhetorical situation for your audience members as well. So how can you address concerns that they might have, as well as things that you might be knowledgeable about now, but they might not be? How can you begin to inform them, persuade them, and ultimately get them to take action, if that's your goal, from this argument that you're making? So think about each paragraph as an opportunity to address your audience and begin to convince them of whatever it is that your thesis is trying to argue. Important things to be considering: be thinking about the context surrounding your problem. Remember that we did this a lot in the incident analysis, where you were breaking apart the issue and thinking about who, what, where, when, and why. That's your context. What's going on? What's the background of this problem? Be thinking about your audience, like we just talked about, and how you can address them best. Think about the stakeholders. Remember that your audience might just be one set of stakeholders, but there are actually tons who are concerned about this issue. Think about resistance that you might encounter. What are problems that your audience members or stakeholders are going to have, as well as other contextual burdens or boundaries that are going to get in the way of achieving a solution or convincing people of causes or results of a problem. Think about the ultimate impact that your project might have. What are those ripple effects going to be? What are other unforeseen outcomes that you need to consider when you're talking about your thesis statement? And then ultimately, what's the action? What's the goal for this project? Typically, when we write something like this, we want people to go out and do something, or at the very least, we want them to be believing something different or thinking about something differently. What is the action you want your audience members to take by the time they've finished reading your project? Think about how you can incorporate that as an important piece of your project and make sure that your audience knows what action you want them to take as well. These are big, important, complex, and often really challenging ideas that we tackle in the researched project. If at any time you've got questions about these things or you want to talk more, please let me know.